Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's first Fireside Chat. Please welcome United States Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta, and Vice President of Education Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Cheryl Oldham.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Secretary, for allowing me to have this honor to sit here and talk with you today. Just to set up the conversation a little bit, we thought it would be kind of a great frame around this conversation with the Secretary to sort of build on an exhibit at the Reagan Institute that you visited a couple years ago, and it's about rebuilding America, and it sort of sets out a set of key questions and then profiles individuals. And that exhibit, I think, has been around for a few years, but all of those questions still really relevant today. And a great way to kind of talk about education and workforce and more broadly. So one of the, I think maybe a great place to start is one of the questions is, will I ever find a job? And it certainly builds on the previous conversation that just occurred, and would love to ask you, Mr. Secretary, how do you think, how do we ensure that people who are looking for a job have the skills necessary, and what are you guys doing at the Department of Labor and the administration to sort of facilitate that?
Well, Cheryl, thank you, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this this chat. I always find these a lot more interesting than speeches, and so thank you. So I had the opportunity to visit the Reagan Library, and as I was walking, I was struck by so many parallels between the then and the now. And as I hit the end of it, the exhibit presented 4 questions that President Reagan used to ask, and these are basic questions that every person asks themselves. Can I find a job? Can I keep a job? Well, we might have opportunity to talk about some of the others, but these matter, and these mattered in President Reagan's time like they do today, because what people want is opportunity. When Reagan became president, I was a little boy, and all I remembered was things were kind of stark and people weren't happy. And then he became president, and there was newfound optimism. And optimism is important for individuals. Optimism matters for the economy. And what we have today is optimism and opportunity. So, can someone find a job? For the first time in our history, for the first time since we have been keeping this data, we have more open jobs than we have individuals looking for jobs. It's never happened before. And this isn't just for 1 month or 2 months. For nearly a year, every time we release the jobs data, the open jobs exceed the number of job seekers. And not by a little bit, by about 1 million. And so this is an incredible opportunity for individuals. And here's one of the statistics that confirms this. If you were to look at what is called the quit rate, let's call it the opportunity rate, the rate at which individuals are leaving one job for another job, it is incredibly high because individuals know that there is opportunity out there for them. Now, there's some challenges, but these are good challenges to have. The challenges is how do we provide Americans with the right skills, and how do we empower them to find those skills to fill those jobs? And one of the issues that we're seeing is that our educational infrastructure is not changing as quickly as our economy. And so quite often what is being taught in our community colleges is not preparing individuals for the job place of today. And I'll give you an example. If you look at apprenticeship programs, the Department of Labor has, over the last 2 years, about 500,000 individuals have joined apprenticeship programs under the Department of Labor's auspices. And these are programs around the nation that are offered by firms, by associations. They're registered with the Department of Labor. The average salary for an individual graduating from an apprenticeship program just went up from $65,000 to $70,000 a year. Now compare that to a college degree. And everyone in this audience knows which has the higher salary. And so I had the opportunity yesterday to speak to the building trades here in Washington. It's their annual convention. And the point that I made to them is, as a society, we need to start judging success by the outcome. Can someone find and have and keep a family-sustaining job that is part of a career? Should be success and opportunity. Not does someone have this credential or that credential or another credential. And I think if we do that, the educational establishment will start shifting toward preparing individuals for family-sustaining jobs and careers.
You touched on apprenticeships, and this is obviously something that you have focused on to a large degree, and really trying to think about how to bring more employers into the system, how to grow that apprenticeship system in this country. We sort of are stuck at a number, it's not, we're not like Europe in a lot of ways in this space. And so would love for you to talk, if you would like, a little bit about how you have tried to approach this and how you've tried to expand it and maybe beyond the traditional registered space.
Well, we have, we've grown in the building trades. The number of apprenticeships have grown dramatically in the last 2 years. We've had a fabulous economy. But apprenticeships in this nation, for the most part, are limited to the building trades. It's interesting. In Switzerland, the president of UBS Bank didn't start off with a college degree. He started off working at UBS, going through a UBS apprenticeship program. And about half the senior bankers in Switzerland start through the banking apprenticeship program. And so in Europe, apprenticeship programs and on-the-job learning just has a very different status than it has here in the United States. And so we're trying to bring some of that here and sort of, we're a different nation. We have different perspectives, so we need to change it a little bit. But we're trying to bring some of those concepts here through what we're calling industry-recognized apprenticeships. And so the idea is, if industry has certain credentials that they believe are important, if industry has certain skills that they believe are important, why doesn't industry create apprenticeships themselves that they believe meet those skills and those requirements and provide that on-the-job training coupled with, learning experiences to their employees? And you see this a little bit, for example, with some of the automakers, where they're taking individuals and they're putting them through apprenticeship programs so they know how to use all the machines in a facility, so they know how to repair them. And here's the amazing thing. They're starting to have articulation agreements with community colleges. And usually by the time someone finishes an apprenticeship program, they've got, for all practical purposes, a degree. They're 15, 20 credits short. And they've done this, here's a key, with zero debt, because they are working while they are learning. Zero debt, and that's a game changer for so many individuals.
I think that, just to build on that a little bit, that piece about apprenticeships and the industry recognized an employer sort of leadership in that, and obviously coming from the chamber, this is something we think about and are focused on, is really that hearing directly from employers in terms of what they need and want. And traditionally, the way we do that is we ask a handful, what are your skills? What are you looking for? And the approach we've tried to take is to really go out into those communities with employers, many together, and getting them to really articulate for them in their region, in their community, in their city. Having these sort of conversations maybe at a national level, I think, is great to set a, to sort of talk about the national imperative, but it really is a local, and so how does the Department of Labor help that happen?
So you're 100% correct. This has to be locally driven. It has to be, to a large part, employer driven, because they're the individuals that know the skills. Employers will change much more quickly, and we need to incentivize them to keep these skills education programs vibrant and up to date. One mechanism that we're using, and the department hasn't used this previously, is the matching fund concept. And so to provide an example, in the H-1B visa space, we have dollars that we receive from fees that employers pay for H-1B visas. So the question is, where are those visas going? And if was to look at the industries, high tech and coding, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing are for the most part the top three. And so what we've done is we have created a grant program for individuals, for organizations that want to provide skills in those three areas, high tech, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing. For a community college to receive that grant money, they need to do something very important. They need to find an industry partner that will match. Not 1 for 1, basically about 2 to 3 for 1, but they need to find an industry partner that will put actual money behind the program. And that transforms the educational environment. Because instead of, and I'll tell you, I was talking to a company that said, we have a community college that is teaching a certain skill that we need, but they're teaching it the way it was taught 10 and 15 years ago, and we're no longer doing it that way. Well, now if that community college needs a match from that business that is using those graduates, that is employing those graduates, all of a sudden they're going to have to change their course of study. It's called demand-driven education, education that adjusts to what is being demanded by the workplace. And as importantly, if businesses contribute money toward these education programs, they're going to be incentivized to hire those graduates. And so you're bringing business together with education, not top-down from Washington, but bottom-up at the local level. And that match requirement is a way to empower that.
Absolutely, and this is not easy stuff. I mean, this is hard work, right, to get these folks together and sort of, create those partnerships. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is the way this is going to get fixed.
And it should be done at the local level, not here out of Washington.
And I think, Dr. Fox mentioned in the panel before this sort of, we must tie education and workforce together, which is exactly what you just spoke to. And I know that you and Secretary DeVos, who will be here later, have really, I think, come together through the apprenticeship task force and other ways to how do we get these agencies working together and sort of streamlined a little better? I don't know if there's anything specific in that, sort of get out of our silos and try to marry that education and workforce together.
So absolutely, Secretary DeVos and I work very closely together. There's an assistant secretary for vocational education and an assistant secretary at the Department of Labor for, it's called ETA, the Education and Training Administration. And in essence, it's almost the same thing, right? One is through a community college, one is not through a community college, but it's pretty much the same thing. And so, if Chairwoman Fox were here, she would say, stop calling it training, because it's not training. She would say it's all education. And she is 100% correct. Our society has changed in so many ways. But there's one thing that is very slow to change, and that's the way we educate. And so we're still educating today, for the most part, the way we educated centuries ago. A classroom, one teacher, technology is being used a little bit. And out there are these concepts of the flipped classroom where, students will watch a video at home and then come in, and instead of being lectured to, they'll interact with each other, and the teacher goes around from station to station and sort of helps the students interact with each other. There are so many, there's the idea of stackable credentials. Instead of 4 or 6 years and a degree, you get a little bit of knowledge and a credential, and then you start to work, and then another credential, and you start to work, and you engage in lifelong learning with a series of stackable educational opportunities. We really haven't taken a step back and said, what is the right education for the modern workplace? Is it you go to school and then you work? Or is it, we start merging education and working so that we have lifelong learning and lifelong earning all together? And these are big questions that I think are going to have to be tackled, and I think we're going to see a lot of change going forward.
And the administration just announced the National Advisory Board on the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. Sorry. But it is this idea of creating a workforce strategy for the nation. And I think that hopefully is what we'll get to with that board, is how do we create the new education and workforce for the economy?
It is, and part of that also has to be, how do we judge success? And I'll give you all an example. So we have a program at the Department of Labor that covers the entire nation, 120 locations. We spend over $1 billion offering education to young Americans in skills. And the way that it used to be judged was that they get a credential. And we just changed it to, did they get a job? Was it a job in the area for which they received the education? Did the job have a higher salary level than the job that they had before they received the education? And did they keep the job, right? Our focus, and one of the questions that I think the council is going to be tackling is, what metrics are we using to judge all these programs across government? Did they get a credential, or did this change their life trajectory by empowering them with the skills to actually find a job that paid a more significant salary, and did they keep that job?
So, we've been talking a lot about, the various ways that we can think about sort of new workers or hiring, can I get my first job? What about, we talked about it earlier today, the pace of change is like we've never seen it before. Certainly, we think often about how that pace of change is so fast that it's faster than the employers can actually even communicate the change in the skills to education workforce providers so that we can all keep up. But one of those questions at the Reagan Institute was, will I keep my job? How do we think about that in this rapid pace of change, and how do those current workers upskill and reskill in order to keep?
So that's right. So the genius of President Reagan was he tapped into these core questions that everyone had, and if you're in the Reagan Library, this is one of the last exhibits, and you walk through, can I find a job? Can I keep my job? And I think this is a question that is so easy to address today, because individuals, let me rephrase. The pace of change is increasing, but the opportunities are there. And so, can I keep my job? Let's look at the data, then let's talk about how things are changing. If one was to look at the data, the number of individuals that are leaving their job for a different job is twice the number of individuals that are being laid off. In other words, voluntary departures are double involuntary departures. And that ratio is the highest it's been pretty much since we've started keeping this economic data. And that says something about the power of this economy to empower individuals, because individuals are leaving to find a better job so much more. And so, can I keep my job? As a statistical matter, the answer is you're more likely to keep your job now than ever before. Now, individuals are worried, and they're worried because they see technology changing. Are my skills going to be sufficient in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And that's a serious question. And going back to my comment a little bit earlier about stackable credentials, one of the challenges that I think the educational institutions need to take on is, let's move away a little bit from the concept of you've been educated and now you're working to, let's merge the workplace and the educational establishments through a process of continual learning. Whenever a new Microsoft program comes out, we all have to learn the new way of doing it, and the new Windows is a little bit different, and we all figure it out, right? Well, skills in the workplace are exactly the same. As things change, as new approaches are developed, businesses need to work with employees to make sure that they have the latest skills. And investing in that is going to have a great rate of return. And that's why you're seeing more and more businesses embrace concepts such as apprenticeship programs and on-the-job learning, because they want to keep their employees. And so it's an area of concern to Americans. Americans see the pace of change and they worry. But if we look at what's happening, businesses are stepping up, and educational institutions also need to step up to provide that lifelong learning. And in fact, what we're seeing in the economy is that individuals are remaining in their jobs and are being provided education by their employers because it's so hard now to find employees that employers want to keep them.
Is there anything that what can government do to sort of support that, right? Businesses need to step up, the individual needs to take part in the training, needs to recognize the need to upskill and reskill and move on. The businesses, it's sort of like we need this new social contract between the three. What is government?
Well, I've talked a little bit about that. The grant program, for example, with the H-1B dollars, with the H-1B fees is one example, where government's providing some grants for those educational institutions that want to partner with businesses to provide skilling opportunities. Something we've talked about as an administration is expanding the Pell grant program. You can get a Pell grant to get an associate's degree in any number of subjects, but you can't get a Pell to get a certificate in coding, because a Pell is limited to programs that have a certain number of hours. In essence, it amounts to a degree program. Why is that? Why is a certificate in coding that could lead to an amazing job and an amazing career not worthy of a Pell, but an associate's degree in coding is? Are we saying we're focusing on the credential, or are we saying we're focusing on the skill? And so one of the things I think is important as government is for us to take a step back and we're spending billions and billions and billions on providing educational opportunities to individuals. Are we saying it's your individual choice, or are we biasing the scales by providing billions to a particular type of education and very little to another type of education? And so that's something that government can certainly do, to take a step back and stop moving the scales. And I think that could really empower our educational system to adjust much, much more quickly. How many community colleges are offering a degree instead of a certificate program because Pell grants are available for one and not the other? How are government choices impacting the market for education?
And there are so many new pathways to these credentials now that we do have to think differently. I think it's a wonderful comment. So a couple of the other questions that arose were, should I invest in my business, and can I risk going out on my own? And those are sort of, again, along this idea of, a changing environment and taking risks, and it's challenging and it's hard. What would you say to that?
Well, let me sort of take those in reverse order. Can I go out on my own? Something that, we see a lot in the United States are individuals wanting to start their own business and go out on their own. And maybe I'll merge the two. Should I invest in my business, and can I go out on my own? And healthcare is one, is something that has become so expensive. And if an individual is saying, should I leave my job to start my own small business, right? All of a sudden, how do you pay for health care? Will your family have coverage? It's not as easy as it once was. Something we've done at the Department of Labor is we looked at this, and we looked at what's called ERISA, which is how the law that governs how employees receive benefits from employers. And we said, what if there is space to create associations? So what if you can have an association health plan where small businesses can come together through a chamber of commerce or through other associations and act as if they're one large employer? And so, for example, in Nevada, an association health plan was created by the chamber. More than 400 small businesses came together, and as a group, they went to market. And they got great health care coverage as if they were one large corporation. What if you can do the same thing for 401ks so that individuals that are looking to start their own small businesses don't face all these obstacles, all these regulatory and sort of life obstacles, health care, retirement savings? What if you can have the Association of Independent Drivers so that Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and Postmate drivers can all get health care through a group health plan? So I think we need to start thinking a little bit outside the box. Our economy has changed. The laws need to acknowledge that and need to, going out on your own, the economy says yes, go out on your own. The economy is incredibly strong. But there are risks. And those risks flow from our regulatory structures and the fact that laws haven't kept up. And so I do think we need to look at those structures so that we reduce the risks of going out on your own. Now, in terms of investing, we've seen small businesses all around our nation invest and invest heavily. Ever since the tax cuts, we've seen a resurgence of investment, of hiring. Our economy has generated 5 million new jobs in the past 2 years. And between the tax cuts and now deregulation, we're just going to see more investing and more jobs. So that answer is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. We are quickly running out of time, but I'm going to put a little curveball in here and say, you have 3 kids. What do you hope is there one thing that you hope when they're out, thinking about where they're going to, are they going to go to college? Are they going to go into the workforce? Is there one thing that you hope is different for them in the next 10 to 15 years? We can start seeding it now.
So, I started off by talking about optimism. And when we talk about the economy, we tend to talk about the economy in terms of numbers, GDP, unemployment. I was reading a book about a month ago. I actually invited the author to come to the Labor Department because I thought he made some interesting points. There is a non-numerical way of looking at the economy, which is, how do people feel? Do people feel optimistic? Do they not feel optimistic? And that really matters because it's not just about growth, but it's about, is it the kind of growth that is empowering individuals? So going back to when President Reagan was elected, I remember very little, but I remember my parents didn't feel particularly upbeat. And then after his election, it was Morning America, things got better. People felt better about our economy. And so more recently, I watched some Reagan speeches. And he made a point that I thought was worth sharing. He said, a recession is when you lose your job. A depression is when your neighbor loses his or her job. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter leaves the White House. And obviously this was during his campaign, and the parallels I thought were really interesting because, if you look at every economic indicator, we're seeing renewed confidence in our economy, renewed confidence in America. Despite the blitz created by the modern media, we are seeing individuals saying that they are more optimistic about where this economy is and what it's doing for their individuals. And so, so sort of the modern analogy is, optimism is when you have opportunity. Growth is when your neighbor has opportunity. And if you look at the tax cuts, if you look at the deregulatory impact, if you look at how much optimism and confidence and investment there is here in America, I think that what you're seeing is incredible accomplishment over these last 2 years. And that's just going to have a wonderful positive feedback that will build on itself and create more jobs and more opportunity. And so that's what I'd like to see for them.
Perfect. Join me in thanking Mr. Secretary. Thank you.